Civil servants in Zimbabwe will expect their 13th check again after the president overturned his finance minister's directive cancelling civil servants' bonuses until 2017. The finance minister just last week said the government couldn't afford to pay those guarantees. So the question we're asking tonight is this: where will the money come from? And is this a case of politics trumping common fiscal sense? We'll be answering those questions on Global Business Africa in the next half hour. Thank you for your time. Here's what's coming up. Repatriation continues in South Africa as fears of continued attacks on foreigners persist. And the Asian African Conference starts in the Indonesian capital of Jakarta. We'll have the details. Now let's start in Zimbabwe, where President Robert Gabriel Mugabe told thousands of civil servants that they will be paid their annual bonuses. Now that's in stark contrast to what the finance minister said just last week. Patrick Chinamasa told reporters last week on Monday that he was suspending bonus payments for civil servants until 2017. On the weekend, however, things took a different turn. The president not only publicly attacked his finance minister, he also accused him of running a parallel government. Farai Mokutuya has our lead story tonight from the capital, Harare.
So your bonuses will come to you.
Words that have predictably been met with praises from the country's nearly 500,000 government workers. Scrapping the traditional 13th check was meant to save about $260 million over the next 2 years. This could have funded capital projects currently on hold because government doesn't have any extra cash after paying its workers.
Finance Minister Patrick Chinamasa has blamed a procedural error in his office for the announcement going ahead without clearance with the Presidium. He says that now that the president has spoken, his word is final.
It leaves him with a double conundrum: where to get the money to pay the bonuses, and how to free up fiscal space to be able to fund other programs. The first is the least of the civil servants' worries.
Where will the government get the money? That is not an issue that we can probably debate at the moment. What we should be saying is there a will to sustain the benefit as a condition of service? And when there is a will, we will always find a resolution.
But that could be easier said than done for the hard-pressed government.
It has no fiscal space, and it is very doubtful that it will be able to afford paying these civil servants when the time comes to be forth, specifically that even the 2014 bonuses have not been paid.
The options to create much needed fiscal space are long-term, so there may not be any immediate reprieve.
Zimbabwe requires to rationalize its expenditure, specifically rationalizing the number of ministries, rationalizing the civil service. At the present moment, with over 80% of expenditure being recurrent, there is no capacity. It has got to incur some pain.
Zimbabwe has already committed to lowering its expenditure as part of an IMF-sponsored staff-monitored program. The scrapping of the bonuses had been seen as a step in the implementation of the reforms. Farai Mokutuya, CCTV, Harare, Zimbabwe.
Now, obviously, the xenophobic violence in South Africa is a significant story. Let's dedicate the next 7 minutes or so to that. Kenmare Resources repatriated 62 South Africans working at its titanium mine in Mozambique for their own safety in the wake of the attacks that have rocked the country for at least a fortnight. Now, the Irish company said it was sending workers home out of fear of reprisal attacks. Kenmare said operations at its Moma mine in the northeast coast of Mozambique would continue without significant disruption. Trucks and cars with South African number plates came under attack at the Mozambican border over the weekend. Kenmare is the second firm to repatriate South African employees from Mozambique after Sasol sent over 300 of its South African employees home. At least 7 people so far have been killed in a wave of anti-immigrant violence which started about a fortnight ago in Durban. Now, also, authorities in Hong Kong have issued a travel alert for residents intending to visit South Africa. A government spokesman says anyone planning to travel to South Africa has to monitor the situation in the country carefully to avoid protests as well as large gatherings of people as well. The Hong Kong Security Bureau, which issued an amber alert, says it will continue to closely monitor the situation and issue updates as needed. Amber is the lowest alert under Hong Kong's 3-color system. Now let's expand this conversation and reel in Angelo Coppola from Johannesburg. He's been covering this story extensively from Joburg and Durban over the last couple of weeks. Deji Badmus also joins us from Lagos, Nigeria. Angelo, let's start with you. The Zulu Monarch had quite a meeting today in the morning at the Moses Mabhida Stadium in Durban. I understand the atmosphere there was relatively hostile. Give us a sense of what happened.
Well, Roman, there was lots of booing, and the booing really was aimed at any non-speaking Zulu who took the podium to either pray or have any few words. And the organizers were trying very hard to get the crowds to let the people say what they were saying, but it didn't happen. So other than that, I'm not sure if you heard the sound of screeching tires in the background just now. That's the sound of the Zulu King doing a U-turn. He's now calling for the KwaZulu people to protect foreigners from xenophobic attacks. He's told his military regiments that he wants them to be his eyes and ears on the ground so they can find out who's responsible for the attacks. He's also called for a transparent inquiry by the Human Rights Commission into his comments that he made at Pongola a couple of weeks ago that are seen as the spark to this current round of xenophobic attacks. Raman?
Indeed. We'll get back to those comments a little later. Deji, let's come to you. How are these xenophobic attacks being seen in Nigeria, not just by Nigeria's government, but by businesses which have enterprises in both countries?
Well, obviously everyone is concerned about what is going on in South Africa, and it's quite understandable that South African businesses here in Nigeria are very much concerned as much, and they have tried as much as possible to distance themselves from what is happening in South Africa, and they've made it quite clear that they are not in support of the xenophobic attacks. They've actually condemned the attacks, actually, but then people are really not swayed because as these attacks continue, people here are getting angrier. As a matter of fact, there are threats that South African businesses will be picketed and probably shut down. Tomorrow, we expect that we're going to see more protests tomorrow and the coming days because we're gradually seeing more and more protests almost on a daily basis. Today, a number of people went to the South African embassy in Abuja, and tomorrow we understand there's another protest at the South African embassy here in Lagos. And you know, there are quite a lot of threats to picket and shut down South African businesses here if the attacks continue and the government in Nigeria does not respond strongly than it has done so far, Rama.
Indeed. Angelo, what's Saki's position on this xenophobic violence? Does the association fear that this could seriously harm the operations of South African businesses elsewhere right across the continent?
Well, Rowan, Saki hasn't issued a formal statement yet, but they are concerned. However, a majority of their members are really small and medium enterprises, and they don't really have a reach into Africa. But they're more concerned about what's happening inside the country. On the other hand, the Johannesburg Chamber of Commerce and Industry has many members that have businesses in the rest of Africa. And they're saying that government has to act at grassroots and has to act decisively, because if they don't, it will affect those South African businesses operating in the region and across the continent. And in fact, the JCCI have been building relationships, they tell me, in Africa for years now, and there's no question that these relationships have been affected by the current spate of xenophobic attacks. Raman?
Indeed. Deji, what steps does the Nigerian government intend to take to repatriate Nigerian nationals in South Africa, assuming, of course, that the violence does continue? And are there any plans to impose commercial sanctions on South African firms operating in Nigeria, like, say, MTN, for example?
Well, at the moment, the government has not disclosed any plans at all to impose commercial sanctions on any South African company in Nigeria. As a matter of fact, if you ask me, I would think the Nigerian government has shown great understanding in the face of what is happening in South Africa. But then the government has made it quite clear that if the situation gets worse in South Africa, it would move in to evacuate Nigerians that are based there. And then in the past, just yesterday, the Consul General, I mean, I'm talking about the Nigerian Consul General now in South Africa, actually came out to say, look, Nigerians have been seriously affected by the xenophobic attack. She said she estimated that the Nigerians in South Africa would have lost about 1.2 million rand, and that's about 21 million naira. And she also talked about Nigerians coming under attacks. Of course, she said no Nigerian has been killed so far. And I think things might get worse if we get any report at all that a Nigerian has died. But then she said no Nigerian has been killed, 3 have actually been wounded, and that they've been treated and discharged. But then that Nigerians are facing the brunt of these xenophobic attacks in South Africa.
Indeed.
Rama?
Thank you very much for your input, gentlemen. We'll leave it there for the time being, but we'll continue following this story. Deji Badmus there live in Lagos, and of course Angela Coppola in Johannesburg. Now, 60 years after the first Asian-African conference, delegates are gathering again in Indonesia. Events kicked off on Sunday with a senior officials meeting in Jakarta. The theme of the 6-day event is promoting South-to-South cooperation. China's head of state, Xi Jinping, along with other leaders from around the world, are attending the conference. CCTV's Huna spoke to some of the dignitaries at Sunday's senior officials meeting to get their hopes and expectations.
High-level officials and delegates from 77 countries and regions have gathered to talk about the future development of countries in Asia and Africa. Over 3,600 government representatives and 480 business leaders from Asia and Africa will discuss how they can cooperate in politics, economics, culture, and beyond.
Emphasizing partnership between Asia and Africa on issues of very pertinent and important values to both continents, namely development, namely cooperation on the political level, social and cultural fields. So in all, it's a very helpful step forward. And of course, we look forward to a very successful outcome of this meeting.
The good thing is that the basis is quite important for all of us, which is the Bandung Declaration. I think that's the father of what we do together in this conference. Expectations are high. We need to be able to cooperate and operationalize actually what we agree here within the declaration. That depends on many national efforts and also regional efforts among also Asian and African countries.
Participants say that the current global context has made the Bandung Conference and its principles of South-South cooperation more important than ever, and they're looking to come away from the meeting with deeper partnerships and tangible results.
The Bandung Conference culminated in solidarity and support for the colonized African nations to get their independence. But after all, most of the countries in Asia and Africa has gotten their independence at this stage, we have to look forward to some economic development, bilateral relations culminating in economic development, capacity building and emancipating of our people in terms of education and training.
The 60th anniversary of Bandung Declaration, and we would like to wish all the participants into having another declarations which will boost and give the future and prosperity for all the expectations.
In the face of global challenges like climate change, terrorism, cybersecurity, and natural disasters, participants have high expectations on the conference, hoping that this Asian-African conference will bring more cooperation and mutual support among Asian and African countries. Hona, CCTV, Jakarta, Indonesia.
Now, the markets have been delivering a set of relatively tepid numbers across the board today. The Nigerian exchange, for example, down by about 7/10 in trading today. However, there's a string of results coming through. One interesting one from Ecobank, the Pan-African banking group. 2014 pre-tax profits up by 144% year-on-year to $434 million. Now, in the statement it did release, it did not give a reason for the rise in earnings. So we'll be passing those numbers and giving you an update a little later. Coming up next, we'll take you where the outdated open outcry system offers absolutely no excuses for failure. All that and more is coming up next.
This report by the African Green Revolution Alliance says climate change will slash food output. Within the next 30 years, the number of malnourished people in sub-Saharan Africa could jump nearly 40%.
We're halfway through your journey in Africa's business. This is Global Business Africa. Thank you for watching. Now, in 2014 alone, well over 1,200 rhinos were killed for material that's essentially the same as this stuff, what's on your nails. Now, that's just a snapshot of a poaching crisis that has decimated rhino and elephant herds right across sub-Saharan Africa. So far, the response from most countries has been to beef up security in game parks, to adopt more aggressive tactics in dealing with poachers, and in the case of some countries like Kenya, to burn ivory stockpiles altogether. Now, all of these approaches, however, deal with poaching and wildlife conservation as a pure criminal problem. Tonight we're asking, is it perhaps time to think about this differently and to look for market-based solutions? Kwame Owino is the Chief Executive Officer of the Institute of Economic Affairs here in Nairobi. He's with me in studio right now. Mr. Owino, thank you for your time. Let's start perhaps with the broader picture here. Why is it that authorities in East Africa, Kenya in particular, regard poaching as just a pure criminal problem and not an economic one? Doesn't that perception bias make it harder to solve this problem?
Yes, it does, but I think it's understandable partly because, I mean, the poachers, I mean, many elephants that die and rhinos actually meet gruesome deaths. So that emotional response is one of the things that most governments value speedy responses, and therefore to just ban is very, very easy because either what you do is just pass a law and then say that, look, we're going to do strong, we're going to respond strongly to this menace, as many of them call it, in the hope that that will solve the problem. But that's an incomplete analysis of what the problem is, because part of the reason those deaths occur is because there's very real and strong demand for the ivory on one side and rhino horn on the other.
Indeed, and it also ignores the economic context in which it takes place. But some argue that burning things like ivory, while symbolically strong, it does send quite the message, it doesn't actually solve much, because all it does is diminish the available supply of ivory and pushes up the unit cost per kilogram of the commodity. What do you make of that argument?
I mean, that argument is sensible. Actually, it's a strong argument that I believe as well. Partly because when you ban by setting on fire ivory stocks, what you're actually doing is basically a symbolic statement, but you're actually not saving new elephants by virtue of the fact that these are elephants that are already dead, whether killed by poachers or by natural means. So it's a very strong symbolic statement, but I don't think that it affects it affects the incentives of a person who wishes to acquire ivory. As it is in Kenya, I think it's been done on 3 occasions. It's not helped much, in addition to the fact that it's a scientific lie. Setting ivory on fire does not necessarily lead to its consumption. In fact, in many places, it's been suggested that some of that ivory that has been set on fire spectacularly then makes its way to the market because all you do is scrape out the soot. So it's a spectacular lie, but mostly it's pyrotechnics for the purposes of, again, impressing the public.
Indeed. I'm going to use the word farming very loosely here, but let's look at the economic pros and cons of legalizing the trade in ivory and rhino horn. In effect, farming these source animals in order to make sure that you have a relatively steady supply from a fairly consistent population of these animals in order to feed market demand.
Yes. I mean, speaking about rhinos, I'm very, I think, let me say I'm conflicted about rhinos. Whether rhinos can be saved, I think the numbers have gone right down to quite low levels. Whether they can be saved through this mechanism or not is a different matter. But for elephants, I think I'm more convinced it's not necessarily a silver bullet, but actually to farm some of them for the purposes of extraction, reasonable extraction, and plowing that back that money to its conservation is a very sensible thing. And of course, on the other side as well, they can be guarded, or rather they can be protected by other means. But my view is that if all we do is let elephants stay as standing targets, it's unlikely that they'll be, with the emotional appeal that, look, only elephants should wear ivory, it's unlikely that we'll have them for much longer, because that same strategy and policy, conservation policy response has failed us in the case of rhinos.
Indeed. Finally, though, let me play the devil's argument here. Most individuals have put that argument to respond by saying that legalizing these commodities, ivory and rhino horn, would only serve to push up demand and therefore create this vicious feedback loop where demand for ivory, illegal or legal, tends to go up.
Again, this is not a silver bullet, so basically just legalizing demand is not going to diminish everything. But I think one of the things it's going to do is relative to the illegal market, there'll be an opportunity for those who want to use ivory products to actually get them off the legal market. So what you do is then you squeeze the illegal side of the market, and that might save many more elephants than are saved today. So yes, I think legalization has to be part of the portfolio of policies for conservation on the continent, but specifically in Kenya as well. It's something that must be considered.
Indeed. We'll leave it there for the time being. Thank you for your input tonight. We've been speaking to Kwame Owino, CEO of the Institute of Economic Affairs. There will be an interesting debate around this particular subject later on the 25th of April. We'll cover that event and bring you the ideas on both ends of the debate on global business. Now, let's take it to Ethiopia. The commodity exchange over there has proven to be quite the standout performer among the 8 sub-Saharan African exchanges established over the last 2 decades. With funding from the US and the United Nations, the marketplace was initiated to improve food security for the local population and to support local farmers. As Girum Challa reports, Ethiopia is a story of success where many other African commodity exchanges have flopped.
A bell rings, signifying the beginning of yet another day of buying and selling here at the Ethiopian Commodity Exchange trading floor. Here, 6 commodities including sesame, maize and wheat are exchanged. When ECX was launched in April 2008, it only had 5,000 clients. Now that number has reached 15,000. And it has 19 delivery sites across the country.
We have brought an internationally fit, globally competitive technology that we have used here at ECX. First, in terms of clearing and settlement, because in the previous system, people used to get denied of what they have sold to the buyers or other parties. But now we have a T+1 system. So anyone who's trading their commodity in the exchange floor today, they get their payment in the next day, even before 11 in the morning. And that is a huge success.
The market information has helped millions of farmers and their unions to get efficient, transparent and profitable trading system. According to ECX, it has a lot of economic implications for the nation.
The exchange has contributed a lot to the country economically because a lot of commodities that are highly strategically commodities to the country have joined the exchange, and we have, as an exchange, played a great role in managing the overall commodities of more than millions of tons of commodities.
The payment system used to be a problem, but now they have a 100% functioning payment system. The other issue was quality. As a buyer, you cannot check all commodities, but that has been resolved by the quality assurance and grading works done here.
The Ethiopian Commodity Exchange is arguably one of the few best in Africa. It operates these mega warehouses and a quality assurance laboratory too. But though success stories are everywhere, one important item is still missing: ECX transformation from the outdated outcry trading system to the online one.
Sometimes, because of the failure of the system, auctions are opened late. That is due to the system problem in the country. I say it would be good to fix that and begin the electronic trading system.
What we think is important and needs to be implemented now is taking the trading system to the next stage, that is, to online trading. So far, the 7 years of working here, we have learnt a lot. It is the high time we begin the online system.
There is good news for these members. ECX is preparing to launch its first over-the-net trading.
Envisaging the future, electronic trading is one of the things that we are pursuing. So luckily, we are going online by the coming July, which we have been preparing a lot. On this regard, we have done already trainings, a fundamental training on online trading, also on intermediate trading.
The Ethiopian Commodity Exchange has bigger tasks ahead. With Ethiopia's attempt of industrializing the economy, agriculture has been given the leading role. That simply means creating well-equipped and sustainable market for farmers is fundamental. This is a job left for ECX. It looks like it can surely deliver. Girum Challa, CCTV, Addis Ababa, Ethiopia.
From Ethiopia, let's take it to the small West African nation of Benin. It's one of the poorest countries in the world. 2/3 of the population earns a living from agriculture, and at least 1/3 of the country's entire GDP comes from that sector. Benin's government now wants to diversify. To that end, it's aiming to boost pineapple output to about 600,000 tons this year from 150,000 tons 3 years ago. Tonight in Grassroots, we visit a pineapple processing plant in Benin, which is mainly run by women.
We can produce 60 to 65 tons of pineapples per acre. It's a profitable business because if you sell these tons to processing plants, you will make a lot of money. This work really allows women to make a living. It has given us financial autonomy, and now we are able to develop many other activities.
Nous les femmes, on voit que nous avons... Avant de commencer cette activité, effectivement, j'étais une...
I was a small trader, which allowed me to support myself and my family. But when I started processing pineapples, I stopped that work. Pineapple processing is a very profitable business. I started slowly with 10, 20, and 40 pineapples. But today, I process 1 ton of pineapples a month. With the revenue generated, I've been able to set up my own processing unit.
Avec une quarantaine de fruits.
At the beginning, the transformation was handmade, but little by little, I've been able to buy my own processing plant. With the money saved, I've bought a land to build a house to expand my business because I'm now working from home.
In Benin, around 25% of pineapple produce is processed. And the reason why the processing is increasing, of course, is due to the fact that a very small part is export, it's only 2%, so they need to process these fruits in order to be able to sell it at higher price. Why we have more women, I can say that in Benin, processing is commonly a women activities.
Quick run through the currencies here for you. Not much has changed with regard to the broad trends for the currencies that we follow here. The Naira still around the 199 to the dollar mark. The Kenyan shilling still relatively weak, 93.55 to the dollar. One interesting story, however, that will have an effect on the kwacha. The government has set the royalty tax rate for open cast and underground mining at 9%. That's coming through on Monday. It should provide a bit of support moving forward to the Zambian currency. Now, here's what we're working on for tomorrow's program. We'll be back in South Africa. The Ministry of Home Affairs there plans to beef up its immigration inspectorate to investigate companies employing foreign nationals without the correct documentation. We'll be looking at that in detail. We'll also be looking at the growing ties, commercial and otherwise, between Africa and Asia as the Asia-Africa Conference takes place in Indonesia. All that and more is in a pipeline for tomorrow's program, but that's it for today's edition of Global Business. We like hearing what you think about what we do around here. Send your feedback to globalbusinessafrica@cctv.com. And of course, when we're not on air, Facebook and Twitter are your port of call. Plenty of content, opinions and debates going on over there all the time. Thank you for watching. I'm Ramanya.